Hello, and welcome to this, the Savage Balance Podcast. Hello there, and welcome to this episode number 27 of the Savage Balance Podcast. How you all doing, guys? Are you doing well? Are you doing good? Are you enjoying the warmth and the sun and the lovely weather? And are you enjoying it safely and responsibly and socially distanced as we, at least in the UK, come out of sort of lockdown and we start to ease our way, hopefully, into the end of that sort of era in our lives? I hope you're being safe with it. I hope you're being cautious. I trust you, though. You guys are good guys, aren't you? I trust you've got this, guys. You got this. I believe in you. As long as you do the stuff, then I believe in you. If you stop doing the stuff, then, I think I'm going to stop believing in you. But I believe in you. You know what? There's always room for a second chance. I forgive you. Just try to be good with it, yeah? Try to keep it all cushy. Nice. Thank you very much, everyone who checked out last week's episode. For those who didn't see it, it was a kind of deconstruction of the sort of food reviewer and football enthusiast, the YouTuber Blue Van Man. I really enjoyed that episode. I found it a lot of fun, and a lot of new people came and listened. So thanks very much for checking it out, guys. I will say now that there are sort of developments happening from that. I'm not too sure whether to reveal it or not. No, you know what? I'm pretty sure it's going to happen, so I will reveal it. We're going to have a Blue Van Man on the podcast because he listened to it and he was quite excited about it. And so we're arranging at the moment to have a podcast together, and we're going to chat about I don't know what we're going to chat about. That's part of the fun, but I'm really excited about that. So, if you checked out last week's, then be prepared. That's going to be coming in the next few weeks, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Yeah, but thanks for checking out anyway. I hope that there is something in this episode for you as well. I guess it's sort of more of a serious subject. It's a subject I wanted to sort of be a little bit distant from in terms of time. I didn't want to, try and talk about it too soon, because, it's a sensitive and delicate and difficult subject, I guess. As you all know from the name of the podcast, this is a really sort of talking about Nikki Grahame, who the celebrity, the Big Brother contestant, become celebrity after that, who on the 9th of April died, unfortunately, tragically, due to complications of anorexia. And yes, at the age of 38, it's really tragic. And it wasn't until I started doing the research for this and looking over old interviews and stuff with her, I got a bit emotional, and it's really hit me personally, but it's hit a lot of people I know personally as well. Maybe it's the manner in which she passed. Maybe it's her age, or maybe, I think there's a lot to say about it, and I do have things to say about it, hence this podcast, but I wanted that bit of distance because I didn't want to lose sight of the fact that this is a real human being, that Nikki was a big personality and, just an extraordinary human being, and I don't picture her in the same way as, other celebrities, like mega celebrities who, for example, maybe kind of distant from friends and family. I could see with her that she relied heavily on them and had these beautiful relationships with them, with her family, with her mother, with her friends. And I want to be respectful to them. I want to be respectful to them and their grief at the moment. I genuinely couldn't imagine if, for any of the people that I love and care about, if they were to pass. And not only would I deal with that, but I would be dealing with the public perception of that and seeing them being discussed about on television and on social media and in newspapers and in articles and all of this stuff, and people who didn't know her is talking about her, including me right now. That's why, it's a difficult thing to approach, but I think there's ways to do it respectfully, and I hope that if anyone listened to this, they would see that I was coming at it as respectfully as possible. So I don't want to lose sight of those people, and there's a lot of life to celebrate for her. She was a wonderful human being, at least the public perception of a lot of it was. And that when she'd smile and when she was in her element, it's like she just looked like a really beautiful human being anyway. So I wanted to say that beforehand. And I also want to say that although I will be talking a bit about anorexia, I'm not an expert and I don't know a lot. And I am extra cautious about this because I don't want to put my foot in it, in a sense. Like, I don't want to overstep my mark about what I understand and what I'm comfortable talking about, because there could be consequences if I do that. So I don't want to really focus on that too much. But it is worth talking about. And I think it's probably now is a good time to give a definition of anorexia. Or at least I'll go through the criteria. I looked at a few videos and I tried to understand a bit from the DSM-5, for those of you who don't know, is a sort of diagnostic manual in which people are diagnosed from. And so there's ways in which it changes. And my definition, I think, that I'm going to say now is 10 years old. So it might have changed a bit since then. There might be things added or taken away. But I think it's mainly all there. So from what I understand, there are 4 criteria for what somebody would be diagnosed with anorexia with. The first being a person's refusal to maintain an ideal body weight. And one of the reasons I wanted to mention and talk about this is I think that people would see that. They would see somebody who would fit that description, a person's refusal to maintain an ideal body weight, and they would be talking about them in terms of them being anorexic. And I don't think that's always the case, just because someone refuses to maintain an ideal body weight. There's pressures from other places. That is not inherently in itself enough to get a diagnosis of anorexia. The 3 other criteria are an extreme fear of gaining weight, a distorted self-perception, and also a loss of period, which I didn't know about personally. That I find that really interesting. It's not something I recognized. As I say, maybe this is now outdated. It's from 2011, so it's 10 years old. But if that is still the case, that's really interesting. And so it's a mental illness, really. Like, it's not a mental health issue. And I want to, try and make that clarification, maybe using the example of, like, if you were at the gym, you would be looking after your mental health by, doing the reps and keeping that practice up, because if you stopped, then whatever you're trying to get from the gym, your cardio or your strength would start to decrease. Whereas a mental illness is more like a leg breaking, or like a serious injury to yourself, and it's something that you have to recover from in that way. Like, they're 2 different things, mental health and mental illness. So I think it's worth making that clarification. But it's also something that obviously has physical complications from it as well. It affects the bones, and then therefore that affects the heart and the skin and the kidneys, and it requires specialist training to really understand it more. I've also heard that it can be sort of characterized in a sense as an addiction, but it requires a specific tailored help, as in, addictions like alcohol and drugs. You've got a relationship with the substance, but this is more like the relationship with yourself, and it's amplified onto the subject. If that makes sense. Like, it's not specifically the food, it's more the thought pattern. I guess that's true with alcohol and drugs. But the difference is that, for example, you can go cold turkey on alcohol. You can find ways, abstinence is an approach that you can take. But we all need food to survive. It's imperative and it's essential for our living. So you have to find a system and find the system in place to work with that eating. So, it's difficult and different in that sense, and that's why I think you need such specifically tailored help. I also think it's worth mentioning, but I'm only saying this as a question. Like I don't have any expertise on this. I just think it's worth saying and asking that if it is too easy or too simplistic to say it's caused by a sort of wider society values, i.e., is anorexia linked purely with the pressures that come on, I mean, mainly women, but also, there are plenty of men who suffer from anorexia too. Societal pressures in terms of how to look, in terms of sort of an obsession with weight loss, and I would call it an unhealthy obsession in which it is characterizing and seeing people primarily as consumers in a capitalist culture. And so it's mainly there as a way of driving profit rather than addressing people's actual needs. I wonder how much that has to affect. I think my suspicion is it plays a large role and a large part. My other suspicion is that there are deeper reasons to it beyond that. I don't know. In fact, this is a good time to mention that I've got an email address, savbaopod@gmail.com. And if there's stuff in there that I've mentioned that maybe is a bit wrong, or some of the questions I've asked you can answer, I'd really love to hear from you. I'd really like to understand it more so I can be a better sort of talker on the subject if I ever, need to be. So, if you want to get in touch that way, that'd be cool. Anyway, this podcast isn't so much about those things. Well, it is in a sense. Like the point of the podcast that I'm trying to make today is that publicly there's a lot of blame. There's a lot of finger pointing towards what would have caused Nikki Grahame to tragically pass the way she did. And I sort of just really want to look at those finger points in more detail and sort of investigate how much merit there is to them. Is there any worth? Where's the evidence for them? And see if we can get a sort of clearer idea of, what lessons there might be to learn in the future for anybody who's in a similar position or experiencing similar difficulties. So that's sort of the point of the podcast, really. And I want to start this with Big Brother. It's sort of the most obvious, I guess, because it's where she made her career. It's where she became a celebrity, a personality. And a lot of people point the finger towards Big Brother, saying that once she was in the limelight, I guess the sort of argument is that exposed her to sort of pressures that maybe like heightened pressures that she wouldn't have been under before, and accentuated those sort of things that she was struggling with. And I guess a lot of people see that as the reason to blame. So I'm interested in that, and I'm interested in Big Brother and reality TV in general. It's big on manipulated storylines. That's sort of the point of them, isn't it, really? That you are taking real people and real lives, but you are manipulating and controlling the storyline and the narrative that you want to portray for entertainment. Like, at the end of the day, it's entertainment. It's not there. People call it a social experiment, Big Brother. And I guess to a degree, maybe at the beginning, you would argue that, yep, that's sort of a big part of that intention and to see what would happen. But at the end of the day, it was always encouraged and meant to be entertaining. So you need a kind of crude caricature of real life to make that happening. I guess it's sort of like, it's all part of this bedrock of reality TV, like the Rich House, Poor House, or the First Dates, or all of the content really on Hey You. It's all based in that sort of thing. And so to manipulate the storylines and to create interesting narratives, you need to create sort of heroes and villains. You need for people to root for and people to be against. That was always a common thread amongst Big Brother. And I guess, the whole thing is a concept based on conflict. And so how do you create conflict? Well, you create conflict by looking, at least from their perspective, you'd be looking for certain character traits, personalities and opinions, and trying to find the polar opposites of those. So I guess if there was to be a Big Brother today, you'd be looking at, like somebody leave, somebody remain, posh person versus working class, LGBTQ plus versus, someone of traditional values, believing in the sanctity of marriage and stuff, old versus young, sexist versus feminist. That's a pretty common one, and that's one that I think they used quite often, actually. Sort of somebody who's sexist has difficult views around women and sort of feminist ideas. Because I guess in that sense, you've got the kind of sexual edge as well, which is always a big part of Big Brother. Increasingly more and more, it was sort of like you want to try and create romance in there as well. You want the romance story and you want the conflict as well in there. So titillation and sort of like frustration, something for you to take your aggression and anger out on. And so once you've got those people in there with those polar opposite opinions and personality and character traits, you want to create environments in which those conflicts can arise. So you don't give them food for the rest of the day, or you get them drunk, you get them pissed, or you create challenges that are meant to like make them get angry at each other so that you can pick apart the best parts and you can air them, really. And of course, well, part of that picking it apart is having complete control over the edit. In fact, I'm going to put this in the show notes, but there's a great link to a piece that Charlie Brooker did for his weekly wipe, where he sort of took apart the ideas, and it's only a few minutes long, but it's just, you can see how easy it is to manipulate and create narratives based on just having a humongous amount of footage from editing, and it really talks about that a lot more. But people, I think, underestimate the power that the edit can have. And really, you can film whatever you want. I remember once making a short film at university, and I had all these ideas about what sort of film it was supposed to be, and I made it, filmed it, and then when it came to edit it, I was like, it looks poor, it looks rubbish. The end of it looks it looks really bad. I didn't like it at all. So you took the bits together and you reshuffled them and you placed them in certain ways, and what was supposed to be kind of like quite a horrific ending with that same footage turned out to be a really pleasant, sort of nice romantic ending, really. And in fact, I used to do work as well in Brighton on latest news, is what it was called. And there was a section, the latest LGBT plus news. I think they're all on YouTube somewhere. I think I uploaded them, but little news reports about local and maybe national, sometimes LGBTQ plus news items. And I found they were only 2 minutes, and I would interview somebody and the interview would last a minute and a half. Even in that space, I sometimes found myself editing and thinking, if I was a mean person, I could cut that bit together with that bit, and I could put them together, and I could completely change the context of what you were saying. And in fact, often I would change the context in what people are saying, never in a malicious way, but only because it was supposed to be 2 minutes, and that's all the slot I had, and you had to squeeze and fit that in, and sometimes they just talk too long. So it's like, I've chopped that bit on, I'll put that on the end of it, and they're not saying the same thing as they were, they're making a different point now, but it's there. I've made it at least, and it's out there. So I imagine, that's only 2 minutes. Imagine Big Brother having to fill, 45 minutes, including adverts, to make an hour-long program once a day. You'll probably want to have those pre-described, audiences. You'll probably want to have those pre-described characters, heroes and villains that you can make, fit into that mold. And then once you've got that mold, you can sort of play with the mold then. But once they're in that place, it's easier to know what you're looking for to edit it, because it's tight turnaround. Anyway, those are the sort of ways that you can create conflict in that show. And all of that's okay in fiction. That's fine, because everyone's consenting to it in a sense, not just through a contract that you have to sign. Like, I've been on a reality television show before, very brief appearance in ITV2's Girlfriends, and you can't find it anywhere, unless, if you can, I'd love to see it, because I forgot about it, and I don't know how to find it. But you can see the trailer, and you can see me going, that's what I'm doing, go, handshakes, no. So, and I remember signing a contract, and the contract I signed was basically like, we can make you whoever we want, and we own this footage forever and all time through all mediums, and you don't have any say for it. And you're there and you just go, oh yeah, right, yeah. Oh yeah, cool, I'm on telly. That's what it was like a bit. It was like, I'm excited to be on telly, excited to do something a little bit fun and a little bit different. And so they own that footage now, and they can, one day they can edit it to make me look like a big racist, like if the footage is there. I'm hoping there's not enough there that they can make me sound like a racist, but they'd be legally entitled to, I reckon, because of the contract I'd signed. And that's the sort of contract that they're signing to go into Big Brother as well, But anyway, it's fine with fictional people because they're all on board. But when it's real people and you're just signing that contract, and that contract is enough to protect someone legally, people, they don't have media training. They're unaware of the public criticism that they're receiving while they're in there. They're being pounced upon by agents and managers afterwards, looking to exploit them and gain as much money as they can from them while all this is going on. So when you're looking, for people to fit that mold and to fit that characteristic, in fact, this goes on to how you create conflict as well. You're not just looking for opposing people and people to fit that narratives, but you're also looking for, in terms of, at least in a lot of reality TV, and also this was exposed a lot through Jeremy Kyle, you're looking for really specific mental health conditions. You're looking for difficulties that people are having in their lives that really you can exploit. A lot of this was talked about actually in the psychopath test from Jon Ronson, that you're really looking for sort of more televisable, if that's a word, kind of illnesses or mental health problems that are going to make good telly. Like, for example, anxiety might be, good to watch visually, somebody physically having a panic attack, like it's more interesting to watch. Whereas someone with depression, it's not quite visual enough. You're not really getting much out of watching somebody being depressed or sitting quietly in a corner. Whereas a panic attack, heavy breathing and people worrying and panic around it, or somebody having a meltdown, even, somebody with difficulty with alcoholism, and you introduce alcohol into that environment, there might be tendencies for them to, in a stressful situation, have drama that you're going to watch. In fact, a former producer from Jeremy Kyle said, and actually this is in the psychopath test from Jon Ronson, she said, and I'm reading a quote here from an article, which I'll probably put a link to in the show notes. She said that her team would assess if someone was too mad to come on the show or just mad enough by asking them things like what medication they were on. Schizophrenia, she said, was, in quotes, too mad, though if the story was awesome, they would be pretty mad to be stopped. And if there was no medication at all, she said, that probably meant they weren't mad enough. So in Jeremy Kyle, they were looking for different types of, and different names of medication as well. They would know what types of medication people are on and how high the dosage is for what conditions. And it's not like going, you're completely free and you're completely fine of mental health issues. In that sense, you're okay to come on the show. It's like, oh, okay, you will struggle, you will have anxiety, you will have panic attacks, you will be angry, you will be frustrated, you will kick out. We'll invite you on. In fact, Jeremy Kyle show was much worse for that because, allegations of, I'm not even too sure if they're allegations, so I'll say allegations for now, but giving people alcohol and potentially drugs as well. If they were alcoholics, they were legally allowed to, apparently. I don't know enough about that, to be honest. So I will say that they are accusations on the off chance they're not. So anyway, considering all of that stuff that I just spoke about, I wonder if Big Brother, would they have known that Nikki had been in 8 anorexic wards by the time she was 19? Would they have known that and information like that before inviting her to be a contestant on the show? And that I don't think I can know. I don't think we can know for sure because I don't know specifically how extensive their specific checks are. Are they do they go beyond the person? Do they simply rely on the contestant to tell them that? Or do they do their own medical background checks? I imagine they'd have to do medical background checks. My assumption is, and I would presume that they would know that, and they would want to know as much as they could because of the dangers for themselves, insurance-wise and that sort of thing. So my suspicion is that they must have picked up on... My strong suspicion is, stronger than that, is they must have picked up on some mental health or illness difficulties that Nikki would have been having, And my feeling is that they would want to use that and exploit that for entertainment's sake to create that conflict, which, to be honest, it worked at the time. And I will also mention, I don't think that the makers of these shows are doing it maliciously. Like, their intention isn't to specifically target those people and make their lives horrible. It's almost amoral, it's for them. I feel like for them, it wouldn't be about good or bad or right or wrong or should we or shouldn't we, but more about just the primary function being and primary goal being creating entertainment for people. And that a lot of the other thoughts are secondary. Now, I think that in itself as a thought would be immoral, but, I don't think that people working on the show would be maliciously trying to target people. That's my suspicion anyway. Whether they would or wouldn't is sort of regardless of the outcome anyway. And a lot of people from reality TV shows have had huge difficulties to the point of deaths and suicides, not least of which have been in the year, in the past, is it like maybe the past 12 months with Love Island contestants and Jeremy Kyle guests who have committed suicide. All of these difficulties exist. My suspicion is, they would have known about those mental illnesses and mental health conditions of Nikki's, and they would be looking to use that to create conflict for entertainment's sake. And in a sense, their goal worked because she was one of the most entertaining in terms of viewer figures, and if people were to talk about Big Brother and the most memorable moments of all of the show, I think that would sort of rival, the Jade Goody stuff. I think that she is that high a character. She'd probably potentially even be rated one of the highest. So highest ever, most popular or most memorable, at least, from Big Brother. So like saying all of that, I think all of that is true. And I think that is, my feeling is that would have a big impact on somebody, especially if they were dealing with anorexia, as far as I understand it. What is also true, and it is absolutely worth mentioning, is that Nikki Grahame herself has said that Big Brother saved her life. Like, she says, her words are, the difficulty is you don't know ever how much to trust somebody and how much they are sort of loyal to a brand, how much they're putting on a persona in those moments. My feeling is that I trust her and I trust what she's saying, and I can see the logic behind what she's saying anyway, beyond whether I trust her or not. Like, these are her words, so her words need to be said in a situation like this for sure. And she said that being on Big Brother, she said that when she was in and out of clinics for anorexia, like right up to when she was 19, and they were such a huge part of her life, like she knew them more than family, and she knew she was there more than family, more than school, in these clinics dealing with her anorexia. So when she was coming out of them at 19, like she said, she really had nothing going for her, like no job, no purpose, no house, no education, none of these things. Like, she missed a lot of school because of it. And then when she had the opportunity to be on Big Brother, that sort of gave her sort of meaning and purpose and a drive and a reason. And it actually got her a lot of fans and recognition, and it made her life something that she wouldn't have ever expected it to be. And it gave her a lot of joy. Like, I think she had a lot of fun and a lot of joy, and she received a lot of praise, and she got a lot of friends out of it, and she built a career off of it, and that she says that her words are that Big Brother saved her life, that they gave her, the opportunity to almost, you can almost see it as almost like a rebirth, like having a second life, like up and like all of those struggles going on throughout your life. And then suddenly you're presented with a completely new world. Like, who's ever experienced anything like Big Brother unless you've been on that show? Like, it's not a normal. And the reception afterwards when you come out, and I think she said before she's been on 4 now. She's been on celebrity ones and American ones, I think, or maybe Canadian, I can't remember. But it gave her life meaning in a sense, and a purpose and a drive when she was purposeless and meaningless at a point. And so, yeah, there's a lot of problems with Big Brother, and there's a lot of problems with how these sort of shows are made. And I feel like they would have affected her potentially in those ways, especially, seeing somebody have that many meltdowns on a show. But also, in those terms, she says herself, it gave her almost like a rebirth in a sense, like she had a chance of a second life. And I think that's important in the story of her life and the narrative around her. The second part that I sort of want to address when talking about her is related to Big Brother, but I sort of put it in a separate thing, which is fame. Because I guess you're in the Big Brother house at that point, and then you come out immediately afterwards and you're dealing with that stuff. And then people know you as the figure from Big Brother. But after a while, she isn't Big Brother contestant. She is Nikki Grahame celebrity. So there's the fame aspect. And I've seen people point fingers saying like her fame and being in that fame world is a, very damaging part of what led to her unfortunate and tragic passing. And you can see why people would say that, fame is not easy. It's like specifically volatile, especially sort of, I don't know what other word to phrase this in. I don't mean this derogatory, but it's a sort of trashy celeb culture, with paparazzis trying to take photos of people coming out of clubs and stuff. And, people being photographed on the beach in their swim stuff, and some of that being set up deliberately for paparazzi, but some of it also being, really derogatory and like terrible and insulting and just really quite ridiculous, like taking a picture of somebody bending over and you see like a fold in their belly and like zooming in on that and like all of that pressure that comes from, being in the public eye and sort of having to look a certain way as well. And all of that pressure like physically highlighted in those sorts of images. I almost feel like the fame life is a real life continuation of that manipulated drama that people are exposed to in Big Brother. It's just you're more aware of the editors and you're more aware of, they're actually on a set and that there are cameras and they actually film the cameras and people discuss it afterwards and talk about it and there's a big show afterwards when they finish it. But when you come out of that and you are now in the celebrity sphere, like it's sort of a different world. Like it's a different world, but I feel like it's almost like, what is it? What's the phrase? Out of the frying pan into the fire. Like you're suddenly like this. The world is your set, and the cameras are there, but they sort of act like they're not, and they sort of don't. They're not like they are. They're. I don't know how to describe it, but they're sort of phrased in a different way, aren't they? Like taking photos of people and being in their face, or what is it like? Easy, or is it TZV? Easy TZVZTV. You know what I mean, right? The people who you look on YouTube and there are videos of like following celebrities and someone looks like they're just stalking someone for 5 minutes, being in their face, and you're always getting a sort of horrible, aggressive version of that celebrity because it's like they are being invaded. Their privacy is being invaded in that point, and their personal space is being invaded as well. Anyway, you like they're being famous. There's a lot of pressure to look certain ways, and for somebody with anorexia, that is just going to amplify it. I can't see how like you'd have to be hugely resilient and like really an amazing example of a human being to be able to resist that kind of pressure. Like especially on things like Hollywood actresses and young models, like people being told to lose excessive pounds or excessive kilograms or however you want to measure them in weight, to just be skinnier, just the word skinnier, when they're already like at a ideal weight. Things like that. It's phrases like that, actually. There's phrases like that when I'm trying to describe people's weights and knowing how to describe it. Like I know it's a sore and sensitive subject for a lot of people. So that's one of the things I was saying with anorexia. Like it's the language that I'm trying to be very cautious about using. It's kind of difficult. But anyway, in 2017, for example, Jennifer Lawrence spoke out about that, and I'm reading this from a quote from something else as well, from an article, spoke out about the humiliating and degrading ways the film industry approaches body image. And this is a quote from her. "When I was much younger and starting out, I was told by producers of a film to lose 15 pounds in 2 weeks. During this time, a female producer had me do a nude lineup with about five other women who were much, much thinner than me. We all stood side by side with only tape covering our privates. The female producer told me I should use the naked photos of myself as inspiration for my diet." We focus a lot on we see the money and the adulation and the privilege that comes with those lifestyles, and they're all true. But when a human being is put through that kind of microscope, that kind of lens, and that kind of degrading and humiliating, those are the right words. That is, you almost sort of want to describe it as inhuman. Like, you feel like these women were being treated like cattle at a market. You know what I mean? I'm vegan, so I would say you shouldn't treat cattle in a market like cattle in a market. But, they are being treated with no respect, no humanity, and the damage it's going to do to those to people with that kind of pressure is horrible. And it's not just the pressure that person's going for themselves, because the people who go through that and then come out the other side having experienced it, now they're in a film where people, the general public, are exposed to those sorts of ideas as well. Like they're looking at somebody in that and thinking, I should be like that person, not understanding that they've had to lose, the pressure of losing 15 pounds in 2 weeks. And the only way to do that, I imagine, I don't know, you starve yourself, you use laxatives, you put your body under immense strain and damaging. It's physically damaging, and that person is not in their best headspace. And this is a profession that is acting, Like another example is, and I don't quite know how to pronounce the name, Nia Vardalos, the person who wrote and directed and starred in My Big Fat Greek Wedding. She was put under a lot of pressure as well, even though this was her story about her life, to lose weight. And there's an article that she wrote about it. I've forgotten what it's called now. Maybe I'll put a link up to that as well. I might forget with that one, so apologies if it's not there. Look it up if not. But she said, I found this quote particularly interesting because she said, and this is a quote, "It's just weight, just 40 pounds of fat gone from my body. But wow, it's pretty much all I get asked about. In the last year, I got to star in a movie, wrote and directed my next one, and adopted a 3-year-old from American foster care. But guess what I'm asked about? How did you lose the weight?" That to me is like, that horrible sort of, what do I want to say, fetishization, but also obsession with physical appearance above and beyond all else. Because Jennifer Lawrence and Nia Vardalos, they're actors and they're writers. I think at least Nia is. I don't know about Jennifer Lawrence, she might be. But they're trained to be an actor, to act in things. They're not. I mean, it's horrendous enough to put that pressure on models anyway, because that is damaging to their physical health, it's damaging to their mental health, and it's damaging to the wider mental health of the society that they're in. But it's even more perplexing and even more sort of obvious to me when it's like, hang on, they're not even, they're acting. You know what I mean? They're pretending to play different characters. That is not the same thing. Why are you concentrating on their appearance? It's nothing to do with their appearance. Not in a, their appearance is part of the character, but not the specific weight of the character, unless the weight is a specific part of the character, like in The Machinist or films like that. But no, no, what you're doing there, starred in a movie, wrote and directed, adopted a 3-year-old, and people are going, how did you lose weight? It's perplexing to me, and it's damaging and horrible. And I think, in other worlds in fame, if somebody does go through that change in weight, the tabloids will and just exploit that for their own gain. I mean, Adele is such a big one. She lost a lot of weight, and then there was a picture of her, and it was like news. Like, that was news. People wrote about it, and they did videos on it for weeks afterwards, and like people wanted to talk to her about it, and that was all people wanted to talk to her about. She's a musician, she's a singer. She sings, and she sings, arguably for some people, really bloody lovely. But people were like fixed on, how much fat was around her body, or the amount of it. Was there some or was there not some? And that was the obsession, and that is just so peculiar. So I think the fear that is often encompassing with anorexic people in terms of another aspect of anorexia, I guess, is control. Having some kind of control over your life and the narrative and your life, and gaining that control back by controlling what you eat to that point where it is affecting your physical health in that sense. Like, control is part of it. What a fear of maybe losing that control of that narrative. Like, it's horrifically and really unfortunately proven sometimes to be true by these publications, especially for like famous people in TV and magazines and in news. Like, that fear is sort of amplified and it's sort of real because people do. And that's what we see a lot in the world. Like, people care about this in a really unhealthy, horrible way. And in, like, I think in a way that it's driven primarily by consumer capitalist culture that wants to, a good customer is never satisfied, and you need a good customer to never be satisfied so they can keep spending money. So if you are having people constantly fixated on their weight, on the one hand saying, you're like XYZ, so lose the weight, while simultaneously going, there's a new Kit Kat chunky or this bag of crisps is going to be great, and you've got a stressful life, like all of these problems, it's just so horrible. We live in a culture that not only encourages but promotes and celebrates the symptoms and visual appearances of anorexia, except for when it gets to a point. There's a point, like, I feel like a make-believe point in which these, horrible things in culture have decided, oh, that's somebody who can be on a magazine and that's somebody who's mentally ill. And it's horrendous. It's horrendous. And like, dealing with that sort of pressure must be horrible. So I just think about Nikki Grahame having to deal with that kind of pressure on a daily basis, and it being invited and like brought to her life when she doesn't have any control over it or any say over it. It's just given to her. I find that very difficult. One of the reasons I wanted to put those two together as well is I think there's a sort of wider context in which those both exist together, which is, what do we value as entertainment? Fame and seeing people in those situations and those sorts of reality TV. What is it that we value as entertainment, and why do we appreciate that? It feels like a very judgmental culture, and it feels very much predicated on, people's physical appearances, but their sort of mental problems as well. And these are the things, like, if there's conflict with those things, then there's news stories there. It feels a shame to me, but I think those things are there. Anyway, let's jump into the third section, I think, which was mentioned. It was brought up by Nikki Grahame's mum, I saw, and actually a few other people as well, although the tones that I saw those other people using, I just find it very difficult. It's unfortunately become a very politicized subject, and with people either being on one side or the other. Surprise, surprise, in this social media culture that we live in. Social media and YouTube and those sorts of things, they encourage and they create. One of the ways they generate income is by sort of understanding the analytics of you. So going, oh, this person is male, this person is in the 25 to 35 age bracket, this person watches these sorts of videos, lives in this sort of demographic, has this sort of money. And then they know what sort of videos to target at you, along with the algorithms, such as, well, it's encompassing with that. So sort of, videos that would sort of potentially radicalize people. Like, a lot of people my age experience and get sent Jordan Peterson videos. Jordan Peterson destroys libtard, or he, vanquishes feminist, or ruins somebody else. Do you know what I mean? That these videos come up for me a lot, and they come up for a lot of people my age a lot. And it's because these are the sorts of videos that tend to radicalize people. And the more radicalized we are as people, the more we're likely to engage in the content. We're more likely to post a comment and say, "Oh, this is absolute rubbish," or "Nah, you shouldn't be saying that," or going, "Yeah, absolutely, you go, Jordan Peterson." Look, Jordan Peterson is another podcast in himself. This isn't about a position on Jordan Peterson. I think there's a lot to say about him, and I think there's some really interesting and wonderful things he said, which has helped me, and there's also some very poisonous and difficult things that he said, and maybe there'll be a podcast one day in that. I don't know. It's something people talk about a lot. Anyway, he's just a good example of like a divisive figure that people get to see. And so, the more people start commenting, maybe they start posting up their own videos, the more radicalized people are, the more they are likely to engage in using that, the social media or the YouTube or whatever it is. And so the more they can target adverts at people, and the more they can get money and wealth and revenue from their advertisers, and that's how they make money. So it's in people's interest to politicize things, which, I mean, that's quite a big tangent, really. It's not really so much about it. But that is why I saw a few other people whose political opinions I don't agree with talking about the same subject, in which I sort of see a good, valid point for. And it's a long way of propping this up and saying this isn't a political opinion about this. This is, I think, an interesting way of viewing what happened to Nikki and taking into account what she was actually experiencing. So the third part is based on something her mum said, I think, on an interview on This Morning. I think it happened... if I am right, it happened before she passed, unfortunately, which is quite difficult to watch then. I don't know the exact timeline of things, but the way they were talking, it felt like Nikki hadn't actually passed then. So that is difficult to watch and sad in that respect. But she mentioned that because of COVID and because of lockdown measures and the fact that she was, locked away in a house in North London, these things massively triggered and spiked her mental health illness. They spiked the anorexia and they made it uncontrollable. A few of the examples she used was the fact that gyms were closed meant she couldn't go to the gym. And for Nikki, she needed to know that she could access the gym in combination with her eating. So that when she, whatever her relationship was to her eating, the gym was there to be able to help monitor and maintain what she had eaten, really, or a relationship to that eating anyway. And because it was closed, she wasn't able to do that. Also, other things like saying a big part of her life and a big part of her recovery from this and a big part of her managing this illness was having friends. And, not just being able to not see them, but also cancelling holidays. I think that, that takes away that idea of a future when it's like, now I can't go there, now I can't go there. They also said in that interview that she was suffering from, and their words were, terminal loneliness. I guess this removal from people, removal from everything just meant it was really difficult. And in fact, I think her mum had said maybe we could, move in together or do that. And I think Nikki had said that she needed her own space, that was important to her as well. So they were a bubble and they met up in that way. But I guess that distance really affected her. And I guess what we're saying is lockdown happening meant she couldn't control her life in the way she needed to manage her illness. And because of this sparked the illness to be, I think, potentially one of the worst it had ever been, resulting to where we are at the moment, which is, I guess, even worse, unfortunate timing, considering we're coming out of lockdown, potentially. Who knows, new strains, all of these sorts of things. I tend to just concentrate on the day as much as I can, because in fact, this is another thing. Like, this is how I can relate to it, because I'm only really recently learning more and more that lockdown and being on furlough and then being made redundant from the place I worked and coping with all those things and like having to live a new way of life affected me a lot more than I thought I had. Like, I was doing really well with a kind of structure and a routine based around work and going to yoga at certain points as well. And the more those things have been stripped back from me, the more I've struggled in ways I hadn't really thought about. Like, the amount of time I've had not working, for example, has allowed me to do this podcast, which is a project I've wanted to do for like 4 or 5 years. And it gave me the space and the means in which I could do it and do other radio shows and do all these things. But I think I really struggled without that routine and without that order more than I had thought. And I only thought about that recently. And this is me, who doesn't have a mental illness. The only way I can really relate around difficulties with food is I've had my own struggles with food before, in which there have been points in my life when I have had sort of pretty big, encompassing, huge, I don't know if you would call them panic attacks, but that's how I describe them anyway, like big panic attacks that have like, where things have built up so much and I've not been able to I've not had a structure or way of dealing with them. And I've just simply, a lot of the time it's left me like very tense and in a ball, literally on the floor, and like sometimes physically shaking and not being able to like move my arms and like physically not having the energy to go upstairs. Like and the worst times, a difficult day would be having a shower, being able to walk to the shower, having it and going back up. And I just couldn't physically eat during that time. I was being made like a jam sandwich that was cut into quarters, and I would be trying to manage a quarter of a jam sandwich a day, if that. And that would go on for a long time. And recovery, like, it's happened a few times in my life, but recovery would be over a period of months. Like, it would take me maybe sometimes up to 3 or 4 months to really get my eating back to a place where I was just eating naturally and eating how I wanted to. That's not the same thing, but I can relate to that difficulty and that feeling of needing order and needing some kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, like a mechanism, some kind of relationship, some kind of understanding of how to approach food and how to go forward with that food. So I can relate in that sense. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. So it's very different, so I don't want people to be thinking, yeah, you're saying this, but look what happened and look what she experienced. It's not the same degree, but it is, you know what I've just said, it's all there, isn't it? The words. So her mum says that those things would have caused her those difficulties. And I think that makes a lot of sense. That, again, it's become very politicized, hasn't it, being in lockdown and COVID. But, it's true that a lot of people have, and it is going to, and already has, sparked a mental health crisis, really, with lots of people experiencing huge levels of depression and huge levels of anxiety. And almost all mental difficulties, you hear about them from charities. They've all gone up. They've all soared. Like, most charities are not only being less funded, but also there's more pressure on them, more than there ever has been in their life. And it's there to see, and you can see why. I can see the links. I think that unfortunately makes a lot of sense. Again, it gets politicized too much. That's my opinion on the matter, and I haven't delved deep into why people think lockdown shouldn't have happened and why they should have. And they tend to get attributed to different groups, and the more it's attributed to a certain group, it's like, oh, it's that group, well, fuck that group, which is not. I don't think that's the best way to listen to an argument, and I haven't done the research on the arguments. If you were to ask me personally, was lockdown a necessary evil in people's lives? For me personally, I would say yes. From my experience of it, it's been really difficult. It's been hard, and I'm still struggling with it. And I'm trying to put places in, like doing that Daily Habits podcast a few podcasts ago. That was really helpful for me because it reminded me of all those things. I'm trying to get a few more of those things back in place. Like I had a cold shower today and a bit of meditating and those sorts of things. But for me, yeah, to stop the spread of that virus and the damage it was doing to the world, I think it was. But that question, I think, has to be individual, and we have to listen to the wide scope of answers, if you know what I mean. Like I can't speak for somebody like a mother of 3 in Birmingham, or a single, or a father who lives in a separate house who hasn't been able to, like he's the father of some kids, and those kids are bubbled up with somebody else, so he's not been able to actually go and see them properly for this whole time. Or the people who have had their businesses affected. I can't answer on their behalf, and I have to listen to what they say, no matter what groups they're attached to. I have to listen to what they say in terms of lockdown and how it's affected them. It's not for me to make that call. For me personally, yes, considering the wider scope of things. And bear in mind, I lost somebody very dear to me through COVID, and that's, it's a really horrible and difficult thing to be going through. But yeah, for me, I think personally, yeah. And I can't imagine what it's like trying to have those sort of mental illness structures in place and then having them removed from you and not knowing what to put in their place. Especially at a time, when she was getting back into education, they said, and she'd just completed a course working with children with social needs. Like, I could see her being really great at that, to be honest. But anyway, there's that. The fourth section I wanted to talk about from this perspective is something I mentioned before, like I don't want to go too heavy into the detail of, but it's anorexia. And like I've said everything I would say about that before, but this isn't so much about the physical cause of her death, because it was complications to do with anorexia, but more the people people have blamed the hospital and the NHS for the way that she was discharged early. Really, that's what happened, is that she had been treated in general hospital for 3 weeks before being discharged, 24 hours prior to her death. And there was a lot of difficulty, I think, with that sort of time. I think people who knew her and people who wanted to talk, who were there to support her, didn't want her to be discharged, and she was. And this was like, despite the fact she was going to be going into a private clinic afterwards. That's what the GoFundMe page was. I think that's still open. I think they're still accepting donations, and they're going to donate that to specific causes to help people who experience things like Nikki has. So, that's worth checking out. Maybe I'll put a link to that in the show notes too. But in fact, this is all very interesting, this part, but the hospital, I saw it in the news today, in fact, a few hours before I started recording this, that the hospital is now investigating Nikki's death and investigating the causes, but why she was discharged at that point. There's basically an investigation into why she was discharged. So there'll be more details coming up about that, so I can't really discuss it much further than that in terms of the hospital. But one thing, however, that I do think is worth talking about, and I think it is worth mentioning, is that I read somewhere that, I think this is a quote, Nikki never made it to the specialist eating disorder unit because there were no beds available either on the NHS or privately. Now, I don't know the specific truth of that. I just read it as a sentence in the middle of something. If that is the case, and my suspicion is that it would be true, as much as I understand the mental health and mental illness services in the UK, that they are most of them are severely underfunded. And I found out recently with like autism care and stuff like that, it's virtually non-existent, and it's like it's destroying people's lives and like killing them as well. Not to sound over dramatic, but it's true. It's like it's that severe, and the fact that somebody wouldn't be able to access a bed for those reasons in the condition that she would be in. Again, I don't know the exact truth of that, but it's a sign to me that things need to be addressed. They need to be addressed. The way we approach mental health, the way we approach mental illness, it's got to be a priority in the society we live in the culture we live in the things we value, and the things that make us kind of sick socially and mentally and physically in the way we live. Mental health is a big priority, and there's got to be support out there for people, because the consequences are too dire, they're too much. And, these so potentially the hospital and the NHS, had their part to play in Nikki's death, and I could understand that being true. I don't want to say anything more than that because the investigation, they've just announced today, the investigation. But I think it's a big sign and a symbol that there needs to be more funding, there needs to be more support for people with that. So, with those things discussed, those are the four main things I've seen people talk about in terms of her death and what might be to blame for it. And I think, I guess, in conclusion, having gone through all of that, I feel like there's the way that people are talking about blame and the way that people are looking and pointing fingers, there is some kind of desire for simplified storylines. It's much in the same way as we talked about for where do we get our entertainment from, in terms of fame and Big Brother and reality shows like that. Simplified storylines around complex human relationships. We're looking for them all the time as an easier means of understanding. And in that sense, there tends to be no room for nuance. But there's more levels to these things, and we have to try and understand, and we have to try and listen. All of those things that people have talked about before, I think massively they must all contribute in their own unique way. I don't think there's one specific thing that you can say, this is the thing that led her to where she did. They all impact each other. They all interact with each other, and they all, create this world in which she lived in that, unfortunately, the end result ended up being her untimely and undeserved death, really. But this is where, if there is, it's not for us to say, in a sense, because grief is personal and its effect. What I'm trying to do is for this part at least, untangle the personal grief of family and friends from the celebrity that we knew, and how we as a society and as a culture can approach and address this when it happens. So I think we have to try and understand, we have to listen more. We have to, see what we are being constantly bombarded by, try and see what we are consuming. Are we consuming continuous reality television? Are we consuming continuous news? Are we consuming continuous negative stories about people? And, is this influencing the way that we think about things? And is this influencing our need for, or lack of nuance and more simplified and one-line answers to questions? And, can we open ourselves up more to the opposite, to more positive stories, to more complex stories, and try to be more sympathetic and less judgmental to people around us. I also feel like this is a good example of how we shouldn't trivialize things too simply. A lot of people around, I've heard people, say things like, that person's thin, or they've not eaten their cake. And again, what are you, anorexic? Or, just throwing this word out willy-nilly. And actually, I think you trivialize the effects of that somebody. And also, even if they were, that is not a sentence that's going to help. That is a sentence that's built on a lack of empathy, and that is coming from a judgmental place. And it shows a lack of understanding in what you know about anorexia. So we shouldn't trivialize these matters, and we should be very careful and just open to how we use language, and open to other people telling us how we use language, and, picking us up on things. We should just be open to listen to it and go, yeah, okay. Like, I want to get this right. I want to be as effective as I can to the people around me. So apologies. I also feel there's this kind of sense of, what do you call it? Like retrospective kindness. And what I'm thinking about with that is, like with Jade Goody and everything she went through, again, through her experience on Big Brother and then through her subsequent cancer, and the way public opinion rolled up and down and up and down. I think there's a sign, and, where she's left now, which is sort of like a bit of a hero, and people really care about her. And I think we judge people too soon based on the information that we are presented with, especially in a Big Brother sense, especially in a manipulated reality sense. I think we have to try and be more patient. We have to try and be more kind, and we have to not judge another human being until we start to get a grasp on who they are more. Don't just take the certain triggers and go, they're an angry person. They're a disgusting person. They're a rubbish person. Try to be as open as possible to the idea of complexity and nuance within a human being, and let them, be themselves in one sense and understand who they are. Like, don't just go, they are disgusting. Go, those actions they did, they were disgusting. However, I wonder where they came from. I wonder why they are inherently there. You can still be against them, and you can still be angry. You can still say those actions were disgusting, and you shouldn't be doing that. You should not be doing those actions. For example, with Jade Goody, like what she said sort of, I think, was rightly condemned. Like, you shouldn't judge the action of the person. But I think there's also simultaneous room to be curious about the human being and think, why did she say that? Did she say that out of spite? Did she say that out of anger? Where does this anger come from? Has she ever had the ability to deal with that anger? Like, has she been given the tools to deal with that anger? Or was she just left to feel that anger, like that emotional state, and just throw it out whenever she needs to? Is that how she was brought up? What were her relationships like? Parents? What environment did she live in? What was her school like? What were the trauma? Do you know what I mean? Trying to get a bigger, broader perspective of the web. I think there's a similar thing with Nikki Grahame. There's a lot of, especially in Big Brother, when you're watching that at the time, people looking at, her, well, so-called tantrums, but I don't like the word tantrums really, but meltdowns, breakdowns, her difficulties, whatever word you want to use for them. Seeing somebody going through that and not just going, they're being unreasonable, or they're being, difficult, or they're being pampered, they're a prima donna. There's, the action, the action that's happening, you can see that and go, oh, they're reacting like that. But where does that come from? What is it that drives that on for them? Try to get a broader perspective of the web, really, that makes up people. I just think try to not buy into simplified storylines more. Just get an idea of nuance. Learn about the difficulties that somebody is going through, if you can, and be more sympathetic and open to their experience. I think that's all I've got to say, and this has definitely turned out to be the longest podcast. It's not quite long enough to be a two-parter, but it is a really long episode, and I don't think I'd change it. I think I'm happy with how that came out, and I hope that there's something in there that triggers off thoughts in your head that are good and nice and positive and helpful and changeful for the world. Hey, thank you very much for listening, guys. If you could share this podcast with your friends, that would be lovely. We have a social media, Instagram, Savage Balance Podcast, and we have a Twitter at SavBalPod. That email address I mentioned earlier, savbalpod@gmail.com. Check it out. Listen to it. Write stuff at it, and I'll be the person who gets it, the other side. Tell me if there's, any language that I messed up on here. I will absolutely embrace criticism, as long as the criticism isn't the sort of criticism that people say in the program of Ted Lasso on the Apple TV. That's just a program where everyone is just needlessly swearing all the time and they're not really criticizing each other. If you've got something to say about everything that I've said, please get in touch. savbalpod@gmail.com. We have a website, savbalpod.com. If you could subscribe, comment, rate and review, a subscription would do well. But the main thing really is if you could just tell somebody about this and see if they could listen. I'd really appreciate that. The artwork is by Dolly Gray, who deserves a massively special mention for this. Like, this podcast is really their podcast. Like, we talked about this a lot and they really helped shape my views and thoughts on this, and they opened me up to it, the sadness of it and the emotion of it. And I just, I'm really grateful for them for really, like, a lot of this I think they would agree with, and they really built the foundation of this episode and in a way that I couldn't see at the time. So this episode really is their episode. So extra thanks to them, and do support them and go and check them out. The music is by Danny Tonks, who didn't help at all with this episode other than providing the music, just the regular stuff. Kind of lazy, I think, don't you think? Didn't really say anything about it. Lazy. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, guys. I hope this is useful. Stay tuned for that Blue Van Man interview coming up, and I'll catch you all next week. Until then, see you later, guys. Thank you.